Welcome to 79%, the podcast where we make space for physician associate voices that are often shut down. This is a place for honest words, lived experience, and permission to speak. The views shared here are personal experiences and reflections on wider systems.
This podcast is not intended to single out or attack individuals, but to explore patterns, culture, and accountability. We're your hosts, Emma and Amanda. And just in case anyone is confused, we are physician associates, not podcasters. And if you want to find out why that's a fucking stupid thing to have to say, then keep listening. Welcome to the episode before episode 1, the very first episode in the 79% series.
By now, most physician associates have realised we're in trouble. This podcast is about why. Here we discuss the real reasons the PA role has become so controversial. We explore how a conversation that began as angry online rants spiraled into national scrutiny. From Reddit threads and court cases to the desk of the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. 79% isn't just for PAs. It's for friends and family trying to understand why someone they love comes home exhausted or anxious. It's for patients who've met a PA and wondered who we are and how we fit. And for colleagues who want to hear the PA perspective, not filtered through outrage, politics, or misinformation, but through lived experience. This podcast unapologetically explains what it feels like to be a PA in this toxic climate.
The origin story. Physician associates, or PAs, were introduced into the UK in the early 2000s. The idea wasn't radical, it wasn't a secret, and it certainly wasn't forced upon the NHS by PAs themselves. The UK was facing chronic doctor shortages, increasing patient demand and a rise in rota gaps, and a workforce crisis that had been brewing for decades. So policymakers looked abroad, particularly to the US, where physician assistants had been working safely and effectively since the 1960s. The UK version was designed to be generalist, medically trained, and embedded within the multidisciplinary teams. PAs were meant to work alongside doctors. They were introduced with government backing, NHS workforce planning approval, medical school-based training programmes, and importantly, explicit support from senior medical leadership at the time. This wasn't a grassroots rebellion, it was a top-down workforce solution.
So who became physician associates? Here's where 79% comes in. Roughly 79% of physician associates in the UK are women, true at the last published FPA census. Many are first-generation professionals, career changers, parents, people drawn to patient-facing medicine but excluded from traditional routes. It became a profession that disproportionately attracted women, particularly women comfortable working collaboratively rather than hierarchically. That matters, because professions dominated by women are historically paid less, valued less, and defended less. And when things start to go wrong, they're often blamed rather than protected.
The turning point. For several years, PAs worked quietly across GP surgeries, emergency departments, medical and surgical wards. Then something shifted. During COVID, physician associates were not a source of resentment, they were part of the solution. Like everyone else in the NHS, PAs stepped into unfamiliar roles, covered gaps, adapted quickly, and worked under extraordinary pressure. The dominant culture at that point wasn't division, it was necessity. People pulled together because they had to. The shift came later. As the immediate crisis eased, long-standing workforce pressures resurfaced, and so did unresolved anger about pay, workload, and professional value. Across many industries, not just healthcare, post-COVID pay dissatisfaction intensified. For doctors, this frustration was rooted in something much older. The fact that the UK trains and recruits doctors but doesn't provide enough funded training posts for them all to become consultants, so doctors get stuck. Competition becomes extreme and it triggers huge conflict about fairness, safety, workforce planning and pay. This anger needed somewhere to land. Instead of being directed at government policy, underfunding or the disorder of their own trade union, doctors saw physician associates as a largely unprotected symbol of their frustration. PAs did not cause pay erosion, nor did they design workforce policy, and they don't compete for training places. but they were present, expanding, and lacked strong institutional or regulatory protection. Over time, that resentment detached from its original cause. What began as justified anger about pain and conditions took on a life of its own, reshaped through social media, anonymous accounts, and increasingly hostile rhetoric. In that environment, PAs were no longer colleagues. They were framed as a problem to be solved. This framing was then leveraged during the BMA pay disputes with government. Physician associates became a convenient example in arguments about devaluation, substitution, and professional worth, despite the fact our training is largely focused on supporting rotating doctors. Physician associates became the scapegoat, and that's where we are now. To understand the current climate, we have to be honest about that trajectory. Solidarity during crisis, followed by economic and professional grievance, then misdirected anger. This podcast isn't about denying doctors' grievances, but it is about asking harder questions. Why was anger redirected sideways instead of upwards? And what happens when one group is made a proxy for systemic failure? And what does that do to people simply trying to do their jobs? This is where we're starting from.
Bullying, harassment, and the alleged debate. What followed has been described by many PAs as a campaign of hostility. Not constructive debate, not good faith criticism, but sustained, personal, and often anonymous abuse. This has included social media pylons, anonymous online accounts dedicated solely to attacking PAs, public humiliation of individuals, widely publicised manifestos describing how to manufacture accusations of physician associate incompetence without evidence, doxing of PAs, and threats of violence. It is important to note here that this abuse has not come from all doctors. Many doctors support PAs, work alongside them, and some speak out against the harassment. But the loudest and most extreme voices, particularly online, have, incomprehensibly, managed to shape perception and manipulate institutional takeovers, allowing this behaviour to flourish. When professional bodies fail to clearly condemn harassment, the message received is simple: this is tolerated.
So what's the cost? Physician associates have paid a heavy price for the brief privilege of working alongside doctors. Some PAs, people who have practiced safely and competently for years, even decades, have been made suddenly redundant, often with little warning and no meaningful consultation. Others have seen their confidence systematically dismantled. They've been subjected to sustained online abuse and at times hostility in the workplace. That abuse has been reinforced by demeaning and needlessly restrictive scopes of practice. These are documents written by doctors only recently out of medical school and formally published by the Doctors' Trade Union. As a result, many PAs no longer feel safe around the doctors they work with. They fear being falsely or maliciously accused of wrongdoing. They fear becoming convenient scapegoats for problems created by overstretched systems or poor organisational decisions. They fear that almost any task they undertake could be somehow reframed as misconduct or overstepping. Many PAs now feel anxious simply about going to work. They worry about how patients may perceive them, despite years of safe and dedicated service. They worry about whether their roles will still exist tomorrow, and they worry with good reason. PA redundancy is now at its highest level since the role was introduced in the UK. Because physician associates are overwhelmingly female and predominantly under 40, many are at life stages where job insecurity has direct consequences for housing, childcare, and family stability. People are worrying about how to protect their families, about how to pay mortgages and rent now and in the future, about what stability looks like when the career they were encouraged into is suddenly treated as expendable. For recent graduates, the situation is bleak. The PA jobs market has effectively collapsed. Newly qualified PAs are unable to find work or are forced into roles entirely unrelated to the master's degree they trained for. For PAs over 40, many of whom use their life savings to retrain full-time, the consequences are devastating. They took 2 years out of the workforce. They invested financially and emotionally. They believed the PA role would allow them to bring valuable prior experience into healthcare. Instead, many now face a future in which they feel unwanted, dismissed, and humiliated. And underlying all of this is a profound level of fear. Even when their jobs are under threat, many PAs feel compelled to comply. We hear things such as, "Don't make a fuss," and "Keep your head down," and "Just show them how good you really are." This pattern will sound familiar to anyone who understands abuse dynamics. And unfortunately, that fear has proven well-founded. PAs who have spoken publicly or even raised concerns privately have been relentlessly targeted. They've been mocked, threatened, and professionally undermined by people we are told represent the highest standards in society. Patients too have been forced to carry the consequences of this. Some patients have had referrals to specialist services rejected solely because the referral was submitted by a physician associate, delaying care for reasons unrelated to clinical need. Others have faced reduced access to appointments as PAs have been removed from GP practices and outpatient clinics, shrinking already overstretched services. In some settings, patients are now being treated by clinicians with less experience than the PAs who were removed, a reality that sits uncomfortably alongside claims these changes are being made in the name of patient safety. That phrase, patient safety, is repeatedly invoked, but it's worth interrogating who is using it and how. The loudest voices driving this narrative belong to the same professional group that has withdrawn its labour from patients 15 times since March 2023 in multiple 5-day walkouts and has recently secured a new mandate for further strike action. Patients are entitled to ask how safety is being defined and why it is being applied inconsistently. If you strongly sympathise with the BMA industrial action, this podcast may not always be comfortable listening. Those we trust when we are most vulnerable have, in this context, tolerated and in some cases amplified one of the most sustained campaigns of professional hostility seen in UK healthcare. And that hostility has been further fueled by those who follow uncritically, who repeat narratives without challenge, and who fail to recognise the harm being done. The irony is hard to ignore.
Why this podcast exists. 79% exists because these stories are rarely told, and when they are, they're often dismissed. This isn't about silencing criticism. It's about challenging dehumanization. It's about asking why abuse is reframed as professional debate, why women are expected to tolerate hostility to prove resilience, and why anonymous accounts are treated as legitimate voices. Most of all, it's about reclaiming narrative, because physician associates did not create this crisis, but they have been forced to endure it. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of 79%. Each week, we will explore a little bit more of the story that got us to where we are today. In the episodes ahead, we'll be talking about power and hierarchy, and what happens when medicine is confronted with roles that don't fit its traditional structures. We'll look at why that tension exists, who it serves, and who it leaves exposed. That said, we're interested in the whole reality, not just the controversy. Alongside the difficult conversations, we'll be sharing good news from the PA community, moments of humour, and the everyday stories that remind us why this role still matters.